Welcome to the Startups Without Borders podcast. I'm Valentina Primo, and I'm the founder of this platform, this community, and this movement for entrepreneurs who are starting new ventures while starting new lives. Each week, we'll be sharing inspiring interviews with the most audacious startup founders while highlighting resources for anyone starting up. Gear up to get some real-life advice. I'm super excited to present another panel from the Startups Without Borders Summit with two entrepreneurs and media powerhouses from Egypt and England, Anthony Rose and Amy Mowafi. Anthony is a technical and product visionary who founded SeedLegals, a legal tech platform that lets startups and investors complete the legals to build their business. Amy Mowafi is the co-founder and CEO of Mo4 Network, which is one of the leading creative and media agencies in Egypt. Listen to these two powerhouses chat during the Startups Without Borders Summit as Anthony and Amy dig into success formulas from pitch decks to content marketing.
So, I mean, Anthony, whenever you're Googled, whenever you're introduced, every single article, it always starts with the man who saved the BBC. I mean, that's a lot. That's the world's most credible media institution, and there you are. So just so we kind of introduce you to the audience. Where does that big title come from? What is it that you did at the BBC, of course, with the BBC iPlayer that has given you this intro?
So I was happily living in Australia, and then one day the BBC called and said, how would you like to join the BBC and head up BBC iPlayer? And I said, join the BBC, where are the stock options? But I was persuaded to move from sunny Sydney to slightly more rainy London. And this was in 2007, before iPlayer had launched. And the BBC had been, working on an iPlayer for years, but had never gotten to launch. And so my job was to productize it, make it something that would delight people, work with the team, build the team, and get it launched, which, I worked on obviously with the brilliant team. And then one day, Wired magazine had the title, the man who saved the BBC, which caused a bit of embarrassment in the office, but was great for the resume. So, but yes. And then after I left the BBC, when iPlayer was done and it was taking off, it was time to move back to my startup roots. I built a startup. A few years later, I sold it. Then I built another startup, and a couple of years later, I sold that. And I invested in a few startups. And then I got tired of paying lawyers to do all the legals, and I decided time to change that, and met my business partner, Laurent Laffy, a genius ex-VC and serial angel investor. And we created SeedLegals, which is a platform, in the UK, France, and Ireland today, not yet other countries, they're on the roadmap, that if you're a founder, you hop on our platform, and then term sheet, shareholders agreement, employment agreements, everything you need to build your business, instead of going to a lawyer, it's all on the platform. And by the way, for people not in the UK, there's still great articles on how to value your company, how much equity to sell in a funding round, what percent equity you should give to an advisor. So even though we may not have the legals for your company outside the UK, there's all sorts of free, data, information, tutorials, and more.
I think we're desperate for a product like that in Egypt, Anthony. Are you not going to brave the Egyptian legal system?
Well, one day I probably need to brave the German legal system and the Dutch one first, and then I'll get further along. So yes.
So I come across, obviously, Anthony, you have this incredible wealth of experience in getting your companies noticed, your products noticed, your startups noticed. And I came across a very cool quote by you where you said, in content marketing is all about, in the early stages, appearing bigger than you actually are. And I love that, because that kind of defines the first few years of my own business. So I kind of want to understand more, what exactly did you mean by that, and where do you draw the line between selling yourself and veering into kind of bullshit territory, which is where I think I've lived the last decade of my own business.
Yeah, so great point. So for those who know the phrase, to drink your own Kool-Aid, it comes, you can Google that, but
exactly.
It means believing too much of your own hype. So obviously, as a founder, you want to inspire people to follow you. but it needs to not cross over into believing your own BS too much. You need to have in your mind a reality check of what can work, what can't work, and then without misleading anyone, you want to present an optimistic view of the future. But coming back to the point about appearing larger than you are. So the problem when you are a super early stage, founder or startup, is you've got two key problems. One of them is you want customers, users, and secondly, you want investors. So we'll start with the investor side. So there are endless numbers of startups looking for investment. So if you're an investor, you're seeing all these companies coming to you. How do you know which are the ones to invest in? And this is critical because, it's all about cutting through the noise. At an early stage, you have no idea if the company will work or not. Let's say I came to you and said, hey, Amy, I've got this amazing idea for a GPS-enabled bicycle lock that, with anti-theft tracking. Is it going to work? You have no way of knowing. So what you're probably going to do is you're going to start asking some friends, or you're going to do some Googling. If 3 people have come to you saying, hey, Amy, I've heard of this amazing bicycle lock, that's amazing. So what you want to do is you want to appear bigger than you are. And my inspiration comes from, I think it's Napoleon. He had a smaller army. He was facing a much bigger force. And he said to some of his soldiers, go in the surrounding hills at night and light fires. So he sent like a dozen soldiers to a few hills and they lit fires. It was a nothing exercise, but the enemy went, oh my God, we're surrounded. So that's how you look bigger than you are. And what I like to do is, paid advertising is obviously really expensive. It's also non-sustainable. If you don't have investment, you shouldn't be spending money on advertising until you've got product market fit and you can monetize that. Otherwise, you're just going to be bleeding money and giving it to Mark Zuckerberg, and he's already got more. So content marketing is your friend. And what content marketing is about is writing articles that have people linking to you, have people sharing it on social, having you the thought leader in your space. So at SeedLegals, when we started this conversation, I mentioned, check out our blog posts, our data. And that for me is when we really started, we thought, how can we write free content that shows we know what we're talking about, that acts as sort of gravity center for startups. And that then starts having people referring to you. And then get out and do events. I mean, obviously post-COVID, physical events, but now it's webinars. So you want to be everywhere. And when investors start Googling for you or other people start mentioning it, then they know or they think that you're happening. You may be much smaller still, but that's the perception and that's the way to get interest on the investor side.
So that's really interesting what you're saying about spending that type of time, crafting stories that are relevant to your potential customers, as well as crafting your own story. And oftentimes, certainly, on the agency side of my business, we'll get a lot of independents coming through, a lot of startups coming through. And I'm always very reluctant to offer them our services because I'm a big believer in the importance of independent startups building that capability in-house. I think it's going to stand them in great stead in the long term, and it's going to cut the cost of one of the most potentially expensive aspects of their business. And the answer, Anthony, is always, I'm trying to set up a business. You want me to start, creating content at the same time? I still am trying to figure out the glitches in my own product, and you want me to now tell stories about it? So maybe you can talk about that and kind of the balance or the importance between spending time crafting the product. And you yourself, you're a real product man. You've been the CTO of BBC iPlayer. You spent years really crafting these products. And then dividing that up between the time about telling the story or giving your potential customer content that can support your brand.
So that's a great question. So I think, most founders, they think the problem that they need to solve is a technical one. They think they need to build a product. But actually building a product these days is easy. It's cloud services. There are many developers. For the most part, maybe a COVID vaccine is tough, but most things are actually quite easy. The real problem you have is getting people to discover you, getting people to want your product. And over it again, I see companies build something and nobody uses it. So once upon a time, it was said, build it and they would come. So if you wanted to build a shopping center, you'd build the building and then people would come to it. But then we learned with startups that actually you should create a prototype and you should test it with people. And only when people love the prototype and they want to use it, then you go and build it. But actually, I think there's a step before that. I think you should actually market it as if it exists, and see if any journalists will pick up the story. So imagine this is hypothetical bicycle lock, right? Doesn't actually exist, but hypothetical for this discussion. So I could, model one is I spend, a year developing the technology for the bicycle lock and only then discover no one really wants it. So, lean startup says, don't do that, make a prototype, show people pictures of it, get people to try it, and only then, finish the development, make an early stage prototype. But I would think almost go further, pitch it to magazines, to tech journals, to bicycle shops, or whatever it is, write a press release that it exists. And actually, if nobody is interested in running your press release, that's a problem because it's not sticking out amongst the noise. And that means you have to spend a lot more money on advertising and promotion. If you can find something that people want just from the idea, then actually that's helpful because you've got your publicity already. And then you can figure out from that feedback which things people really might want. You might have in your mind, people want this. So with SeedLegals, we had it in mind that people, wanted to use us for funding rounds. But were there big rounds? Were there little rounds? What other things did we want? Obviously, you can't go MVP on people's legals. You can't go, your legal document, this kind of maybe works. So we had to have a proper document, of course. But what we could MVP is that on the platform, maybe we did the data collection, and behind the scenes, we were like manually, crazily creating Word documents. So the customer saw a beautiful interface. We hadn't built the whole thing, but our legal team were making sure it's good law, but doing it manually. And then at the point they went, Anthony, we're dying here. We can't continue. Make it automated. Then we would go and automate it more. So anyway, the long story short is what I love to do is to see, can you, before you even get to building even the prototype, kind of write the press release and see if there's a story to it. And here I call it the shtick. So I think there has to be something that jumps out that's different. And, if you think about different apps, some of them, you might shake the phone, or some of them you might, like Quibi, which didn't work, you turn it sideways, right? That was the shtick, but it wasn't a big enough shtick. Other ones might be like Snapchat was just this crazy yellow thing and the disappearing story. So if you can create something that people go, there's this crazy app that does X, or then, people are talking about that, and that's a super important early stage thing to do. I probably diverted from your question, but
no, it's perfect.
Yeah.
You're telling us stories, Anthony. So I think another thing which I think people often forget as well, in kind of getting to know your own background, I would see you do repeatedly in every interview, in every kind of piece of content you put out, is really simplify the message and have that kind of same message repeated over and over. And so you have something like SeedLegals, which is quite a complicated product at its heart. But I would see you repeat the message over and over again. It's the operating system of your company's legal side. And it's this kind of same phrasing you'd be using over and over again in telling your story. Maybe you could talk to us about that, because I think it's such a simple thing people can do, and I think it's just something that's overlooked. And especially as founders, you get very excited and passionate about your own product. It's very easy to be very long-winded about telling your story.
So thank you for that, because actually I think that's super important. So, at SeedLegals, I see lots and lots of pitch decks. People reach out to me, help me with my pitch deck, send us pitch decks for review and so on. So by the way, I do something called pitch deck clinic. So if you Google SeedLegals pitch deck clinic, I review people's pitch decks.
I've seen it, yeah. Anthony, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Like, I learned a lot from a couple of them. I'm like, well, I make that mistake all the time. It's great.
That's fab. Thank you. So the first mistake that I see, and I've made it myself, is that People are so pleased with what they're doing that they tell everyone what they're doing. But actually, nobody cares. People only want a solution to their problem. So my top tip for anyone watching, when you craft either your pitch deck for investors, and I'll get back to that in a sec, or your message on your website for consumers, don't spend your homepage explaining what you do. Explain instead why you help the user with a problem. So too frequently I see a pitch deck or a website that says, you know, we use blockchain and we use AI and we use machine learning or whatever. And you're going, great, what do you actually do? Why would I use this? And I learned this with SeedLegals. The first version of the SeedLegals site said, you know, the site for document automation and contract generation. And, you know, one day I woke up and went, there are 0 people in the world looking for contract automation. Nobody wakes up and goes, yeah, today I'm looking for. So instead, you know, my epiphany was to replace that with, you know, the fastest way to do your funding round. And then I had people from all over the world start messaging us. So then I had to add the word UK in it. So, you know, I saw when people started messaging like, oh, we're hitting a pain point. People are going, oh, I want to do a funding round. It's slow. This is fast. So I think really the formula in your messaging on your website, there's always a standard formula. The formula is, here's the problem I'm looking to solve. That's right for you. As the person coming there, here's how you're going to help me. Not what I do, how you're going to help me. Underneath it, there's a bit more information. So what it is, okay, it's like it's legals, it's not accounting, or it's not, you know, hiring or something. So to explain what it is, then you might have a few more sections that show particular use cases. So you go from the general, here's how it's going to solve, to a few pain points on SeedLegals, raise a funding round, incentivize your team with share options, hire people. And then you probably want proof points. Here's why people trust us. You know, put some logos of, you know, investors or users or partners or something. And of course, there should be a big call to action button at the top and another call to action at the bottom. And here I divide websites into 2. And I can easily tell how much traction a company has. If you think about booking.com, when you go to their website, it doesn't go, we use machine learning and AI to connect you with hotels, with better, they just go, where do you want to go? So the more companies tell you about what they do, that to me means they're super early stage. The more they just have a button to do what you want, it means they've sorted it. So if you can fake it before you make it, so to speak, if you can have your website look like it would be when it's successful, then either actually it will get there faster because that's really what people are looking for, or investors and everyone else will perceive that you're at the next step. So if your website says book a demo or talk to us or call us, it really means you're not live or you're not an on-demand platform. If it says log in with Google and get started now, that's the whole next step. So for me, I was adamant with our proposition right from the start. You could log in, even though I hadn't fully built it, you have to be able to log in and do stuff. Maybe I would do things behind the scenes. Anyway, so thing one is always focus on the problem you're solving for a consumer. Now, when it gets to your pitch deck, it's a little bit different because your investor isn't really a customer. But here again, I think if your pitch deck explains all the stuff you're doing, your investor's going to go, you're very clever, but I don't see from this why a consumer would want your products. Therefore, you're going to spend all of my money on developing, and you're just going to run out of money. But if instead you think about your pitch deck for investors as almost like your website for customers, you're not trying to sell your bicycle lock or toothbrush or whatever to the investor. But if they see as a consumer would, oh, this is amazing. If I had a bike, or maybe I should get this for my bike, I'm going to invest. And so even on your pitch deck, you know, have it focus on what would your customer message be and the problem you're solving for an actual customer.
That was actually very, very helpful, Anthony. Thank you. That was very specific and very helpful. I think there's this other stage, I think, which people, so we've simplified the message, we've been very clear, you can understand what my product does for you immediately. And let's assume we've done all of these things. And also we live in a world now, Anthony, where, you know, suddenly every single startup has this incredible power that it never had before to be able to create a lot of noise. And what I also find oftentimes, which honestly works to my benefit a lot when we're doing marketing work, is that people will get confused by successfully creating noise and attention around the product, and then and perhaps creating that initial connection between the customer and the product, and then actually getting the product sold, right? Getting feet, you know, traffic through the door, getting sales, making the money, which should be the reason we're all here in the first place. So, you know, can you talk maybe a little bit about that and kind of understanding how to then, I've created the noise, I've created the buzz, how do I go to that next level and actually get my product out the door?
I think that's a really, really important point. And I've discovered in the course of my career, you know, because I'm fairly well known in the industry, I had the ability to get lots of buzz and attention, but I realized was within the industry, not with my real users. So I had a social media app. It was, you know, millennials using it, but their TechCrunch was, you know, writing up the article. So, you know, as a founder, your, you know, dream is TechCrunch write up your article, right, and Sifted.eu and all these other tech magazines, which is awesome. Every investor is going to read it, but zero users are going to read it. You know, if you're selling vegan foods or bicycle locks, none of those people are reading TechCrunch. So you need to be very careful, firstly, that you focus in the right place. I mean, obviously TechCrunch is great if you can get them to do a write-up, and if you're lucky enough, then that's going to really help you with investors. But you have to be careful not to over-index. If you're able to, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to get a lot of traction in the press, if you think one day every investor thinks you've got a huge number of users and zillions in revenue, and it turns out actually it's only investors who know about you. And you see this with, you know, some startups, and maybe Quibi is an excellent example, which is because their founders, you know, are industry legends, they were able to raise huge amounts of money, they had huge amounts of industry buzz, that actually was just the industry talking about them. No one else in the world knew of this product other than maybe a bit of, you know, hype filtering through. So yes, you know, focus on things where investors will go, but in a sense, that's a vanity metric. Getting up in TechCrunch is great, but probably will help you zero with your real users. Obviously with SeedLegals, it's a bit different because my investors are part of my product in a sense. So I'm a little bit different there. But yes, you now want to get traffic and traction with your real users. And I think that's where content marketing comes in. So, you know, too often, again, I see, you know, a company, they've got some products, they've launched their website, and they're going, well, where do I get traffic? And of course, you can pay a PR or marketing company, but that's expensive. And also, you've burned some money and then it's gone. But how can you slowly, right from the early stages, start writing articles? Articles, you see them initially as a pain, but actually I think they're your friend. And what we like to do at SeedLegals is actually we like to use technology to put ourselves out of business. My thought is, what would a law firm, kind of my competition, do? And then I'm going to do completely the opposite. Right. So, you know, the area I'm disrupting, they'll do things manually. They'll do things again and again the same way. What I'll do is I'll put unlimited time and effort into solving a problem and then make it a one-click solution, and then make articles freely available, and then put on a SaaS monthly plan. So let's say someone asked me a question. As a law firm, I would probably research it and tell them the answer, and then do the same the next time. What we'll do at SeedLegals is we'll put one of our team on to really research it. Then we'll write an article, make that freely available on the website. And then we'll, if it's a solution we can offer, then we'll automate that. And now whenever people start Googling it, they see our article. And, my marketing team are delighted that we rank higher than the UK government in some articles for tax things and so on. So it's like, yeah, good on you team. And then people start seeing you as a source of knowledge. And of course, Google SEO finds you. And then people, if they like the articles, they trust it and they tell their friends. So articles and content are actually probably the most valuable thing you can do, and they build trust. And no matter what area you're in, if you think about, that hypothetical bicycle lock, you could write articles on the lifetime batteries of bicycle locks, or, which bicycle lock is best for different bikes. And, you don't want it to come across as spammy because you've got too many, SEO keywords. But you can have a great deal of info. And you've probably seen yourself, anyone watching this, when you've looked for anything from a recipe through to a new laptop you want to buy, you start Googling it. And when you find sites with great content, you start going back there and you trust them. And if they've got something else for you, you go there. Anyway, that's my spiel on content and content marketing.
Amazing. Thank you. Just before we run out of time, so we can have some time to take some questions, we can't end the conversation without talking about Corona and the opportunities and the challenges, and if it's changed any of the fundamentals. As storytellers, aside from the kind of impact it's had on us as a business and myself as an entrepreneur, from a storytelling perspective, it's just been the most incredible opportunity, because the eyeballs have, I don't even know by what number it's increased. People are at home and they're paying attention and they're on their devices, and it's been a fantastic, we've really taken it from that perspective as an opportunity to put out more content, to tell even bigger stories, and to engage with our audience in bigger and better ways. Perhaps you can give your insight on this.
Thank you. And I think it's a great point, of course. And I think it's two things. Firstly, there's going to be taking advantage, so to speak, of COVID. And secondly is procrastination. So let me start with procrastination. So, when COVID started, the UK government said, lockdown 2 weeks. And of course, we all thought 2 weeks, probably not going to be 2 weeks, maybe 4, 6 weeks, cut to 6 months later. And, I would have said last week, another year, but now maybe like another 6 months. I mean, this vaccine might be in April. But the first lesson to learn is do not procrastinate. So, thanks to lots of customers on SeedLegals, we've got lots of data. And what we see was there was a dip in funding rounds, but then it picked up again quite quickly. So it was clear that the smartest founders were not waiting, and the smartest investors who wanted to invest in the smartest founders obviously couldn't wait either, because otherwise they were going to miss rounds. So as a founder, procrastination is death. So if you don't make decisions, you're just going to run out of money, or you're just going to be on hold forever. Because, most startups are burning money. So if you stop fundraising, or you stop development, you just sit in this dormant area. So my first thing is, always as a founder, you look to take every problem as an opportunity, whether it's Brexit or COVID or, whatever government changes. How can I leverage this for what we'd like? So an example on SeedLegals is the UK government announced a furlough scheme. So if you couldn't pay for your employees, you could, instead of firing them, the government would pay 80% of their salary up to a certain level, but then you'd have to make new contracts for these people. But nobody knew how this would work. So I said to my team, hey team, let's take this problem space as an opportunity. And within 48 hours, we'd written a series of articles, and we'd created free contracts on SeedLegals for this. And of course, we made it available for free because you don't want to take advantage. And it was tremendous. We had a 400% increase in website traffic. Thousands of companies, new companies joining our platform because of the content that we created. The press rose it up. And then we also used our data, which then got further spread in the press. And of course, we gave this away for free because it wasn't right to charge for it. So this is about, firstly, not procrastinating, and secondly, then taking advantage. And now when I see pitch decks, I'm always amazed. So, companies these days fall into probably three areas with COVID. One of them is you're deeply affected. You're a restaurant or a gym, there's really nowhere to go. Well, you could reinvent yourself completely, but it's going to be tough. Two, on the other side, there are companies, and our data shows that med tech and ed tech, people educating themselves from home, are hugely increased. But then there's a whole area in the middle, sort of SaaS businesses and so on, which might be mostly unaffected. But I'm always amazed when I see pitch decks which kind of pretend COVID doesn't exist. It's like business as usual. Yeah, we do X. No, you should be, I can't say the words embrace COVID, but you should show how you're taking advantage of it. Either that you're cutting costs from your team being remote, or how you are changing your products to do things. So, I've seen companies that might connect workers and companies, and they've got a pitch deck that pretends COVID doesn't exist. But no, you should be showing how your business is going to explode based on taking advantage of this. And as an investor, if you're just seeing, businesses, you're now trying to figure out, is this business up or down from COVID? And if you see a slide deck that is now almost rewritten to be designed for life in these new worlds, that clearly is indicating the founders are onto it. They get it. They've recognized the problem. They've recognized the opportunity, and they're probably more investable than others. So yes, see how you can think about taking advantage of it, and then also make it clear in your offerings how you're doing this as well.
Thank you, Anthony, so much. I'd love to take some questions. It says, I've got a little ticker that says 5 minutes. Are there any questions out there? The purpose.
So thanks for sharing my LinkedIn link.
I was going to say, lots of people want to connect to you, Anthony. You did, after all, save the BBC, so you're going to be getting lots of people wanting to connect to you to save them now.
All right. So.
Yep.
So if we wait for any questions, maybe a couple of thoughts. If you're an early stage founder, what are the key things to focus on for building your business? So if I can spend a few moments on that, because having been there and done that a few times, I think, one of the key things for me is to create a customer-driven business, because kind of the things we're chatting about, too often I see founders, they've got this vision, they've got this idea, and then they go into their little world and they start building it, come out a year later building it. But what I look for in a pitch deck is, are the founders listening to their customers? So what I like to do at SeedLegals is, as people message us on web chat, they give us feedback. I can't find this, or help me with this, or my founder's splitting up. Can you help me? My team can all see those messages. And that means if someone has a problem with our website, I don't need to write a ticket and file a ticket with developers to do. No, I know my CTO has seen that message, and I know my developers have seen it. And my goal is within 24 hours to see how we can improve our product from feedback. Of course, you can't do all things in 24 hours. So what I would suggest if you're a founder or anyone in a startup, be super motivated to do customer-driven development. Be obsessed with what your customers are feeding back to you. Make sure that this goes to, every relevant person in the team. Maybe your back-end engineer doesn't need to know quite as much unless it's about website performance issues, but you shouldn't see that customers are, on Twitter complaining about your product and you happily disregarding that. And that's one of the things I learned in my BBC days, where I would obsess about looking on Twitter what people were saying about my product, and if the word love was in there, good. And then I was amazed, other TV channels with their versions of iPlayer, their CEOs were talking about using data and but meantime, you look on Twitter and people would say the word shit about their products all the time. It's like, you don't need big data. Just get out and interact with customers, and you'll learn very quickly what they want and what's not working. Anyway.
I think we have time for one question. We have a really great question. So In the MENA region and globally, we notice product variants increasing and product life cycles becoming shorter and shorter. And many entrepreneurs are interested in quick success rather than sustainable success. How so true. How can business sustain their growth? How can businesses sustain their growth and stand out longer in today's volatile market? Thank you, Omar, for the great question.
That's a really great question. I think there's a part of it which is also, should you design your business for an exit or for growth? So sometimes in pitch decks, I see, we plan to exit in 3 years or something like that. I think it's, although I've happened to have exited some previous businesses, I always design, or my goal is always to build a long-term viable business. Maybe the phone will ring one day and somebody will be interested in, your business. But the problem is with thinking about a quick exit, or it means you focus on the wrong things. You might focus on hype. You might focus on getting the investor community excited. You might focus on vanity metrics like website traffic. But without a sustainable business model, if those exit opportunities don't eventuate, you're then stuck. So I think we also, see too many articles about company bought after a year by Twitter or something. The reality is, startups exit typically after something like 7 years. So it's a long cycle. We all see those growth curves that in the best case, they're really slow, and then on year 3 or 4 or 5, they start, doing that. So you should really plan that it's going to be a long haul. Of course, you want to try to get to cash flow positive as early as possible, so you're not bleeding money and needing to fundraise all the time. And this was a really great discipline that my business partner, instilled in me. He's an ex-VC. He's seen too many of his investments go out of business because they just spent all their money. So what we agreed is, right in the early days, we would have a small burn rate. We'd burn, let's say, £40,000 a month. Now, initially, we were paying for this ourselves, so it was much smaller than that, but we were funding the business, so obviously we were limited. But then our agreement was, as revenues increased, we wouldn't just massively increase our spend, we would increase to match revenue, so we were always down a little bit each month. And it actually had me thinking a bit about the first dozen years of Amazon. Every year they would lose $46 million. Investors were wondering, how do they manage with growing revenue to lose exactly 46 million each year? But the trick they were doing was they were spending all their money on growth and just losing enough, that they could easily raise this amount, rather than being $1 billion down. And then one day they turned the switch and, making billions a year. So it's all about focused on the long term, constraining your cash so you can build suitably organically to get to that point. And then, although you keep seeing these articles about early exits, they just, that's newsworthy because it's exceptional. And the reality is, for most businesses, it's 7 years or something like that to an exit. Or you reach cash flow break even. You don't need to exit. It's just a great business. You've got a great business. There's nothing wrong with a great business. It just that keeps everyone happily employed, and the employees, paying their wages and so on. That's what you do, and of course solving the problem space that you wanted.
Anthony, I think we've run out of time. I can't thank you enough. That was so inspirational, very, very insightful. I'm just going to leave you with that thought about bringing SeedLegals to Egypt.
Thank you. And thank you, Amy, for the amazing questions. I've loved our conversation. I hope it was helpful for people watching. And there's also a lot of completely free content on the SeedLegals site designed for founders to get through some of the problems that, all founders really encounter.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Anthony. Such a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
You like what you hear? You should definitely follow us on your favorite platform. So next time you're on Instagram or Facebook, type Startups Without Borders and check out all the videos, the stories, and the resources for you to become a legend.